for spending the time with us today. My name is Theo Jebb.
I'm Philip Jebb.
And welcome to the show. Today on the show, we are joined by someone who has, for the past 2 decades, been one of the country's most passionate, clear, and fearless voices when it comes to nature. Pádraic Fogarty is an ecologist, an author, a policy analyst, and a long-time advocate for ecological restoration. His work has constantly bridged science, activism, and storytelling, holding a mirror up to the state of Ireland's wild places and asking what kind of country do we want to live in and what kind of land do we want to pass on. Pádraic, it is a real privilege to have you with us today. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Pádraic, what got you started on your kind of wildlife journey? Did it all begin somewhere specifically?
So I think maybe I would reflect on how, when as a child, I was mad about nature. I was mad into animals. My room as a child was full of posters of elephants and tigers. I was only really ever interested in reading about animals and watching David Attenborough. I had a great teacher in school as a primary school student. She was big into the nature table and going outside and watching what was happening outside. My mother was also very interested in this, and she was, bringing me to the Phoenix Park and bringing me to the canals and Bull Island and all these things to indulge my interest in the outdoors. So I think that's where it started. I think I lost it, to be honest, as an adult. I didn't get into it when I left college. As a teenager, I wasn't particularly interested in being outdoors. I was probably more interested in traveling and partying, if I'm honest. But then later in life again, I found myself in a job that I wasn't particularly interested in. Not a million miles from ecology, but not really where I wanted to be. Myself and my wife had our first child at the time, and I think I realized that I really should be doing this, I shouldn't be doing what I was doing, and where my real passions were in the natural world and in nature and that kind of stuff. But as soon as I started digging into it, I found that things were not well, and I became a volunteer with the Irish Wildlife Trust. I became chairman of the Irish Wildlife Trust, and that was kind of at the end of the first decade of the 2000s. And we were dealing with some pretty big problems at the time. Agriculture, fishing, forestry, our whole political environment, the level of public knowledge around nature was pretty poor. And meanwhile, we were being bombarded with messages of greenwashing around how green and amazing Ireland was, and this completely horrified me. And that's what led me to write Whittled Away, which is the book that I wrote about our nature crisis.
That brings us straight into the next question, which was what led you to write it? Because I presume that there must have been this canary in a coal mine period of a few years that kind of led to, wait a second, is no one else going to do this? Or I have to do this, So I'd actually like to just dig in a little bit and get that from you. What led to those discussions I'm sure you were having with many, many specialists, and what led you to say, actually, I'm the one who has to write this book?
Well, I mean, there were lots of people working on it, but I think we were overwhelmed by let's say a lack of awareness in the public, and then also the corporate machine that was willing to sell Irish agriculture in particular. This was coming out of the economic crash. Agriculture was seen as a big growth potential. We were coming to the stage where dairy quotas were being lifted. And it was I could put a date and a time on it. I remember where I was, where I saw the ad for Origin Green on YouTube. And it was Saoirse Ronan, and it was, walking through fields of corn, caressing the grass. And it was, our fields have always been this green, our seas have always teemed with fish. And whatever it is about the magic dust in Ireland, we're all just innately sustainable. And I buried my head in my hands because I thought, all the work that not just me, but the community I was in was doing was in vain, because we were just being steamrolled now by greenwashing juggernaut, and I think that was the start of Whittled Away. That was because I had been working in these policy issues, and I thought this story about what has happened to nature hasn't been told, and it really needs to be told, and that's what basically got me starting to write the book.
That's fantastic. And Pádraic, it came out in 2017, so presumably were you writing it a decade ago in 2015, or when did you start piecing it together, because it's a very intense research book. Like, again, very encourage people, if you have any interest in the state of Ireland's nature, to buy Whittled Away and read it. It is a vivid account of all the different ecosystems in Ireland and all the different species, the species that we've lost, the species that are in real danger of being lost, and kind of just our general lack of awareness and ignorance towards it. So again, encourage people to read it. But Pádraic, bring us back to 10 years ago, 2015. Were you writing it? Had you started yet?
Yeah, I think I was well underway this time 10 years ago. I was very much influenced by a book by Callum Roberts. He's a marine biologist in the UK, and he wrote a book called The Unnatural History of the Sea. And what was remarkable about it was he went back hundreds of years to look at pirate accounts of the abundance of turtles on beaches in the Caribbean, say, when Europeans arrived. And so that got me thinking that, maybe there's equivalent kind of historical records in Ireland. And that kind of got me on the path. I mean, I by no means knew all of this stuff, so I was doing a lot of research myself, rooting around secondhand bookshops for old books that had descriptions of nature. So yeah, it did take quite a while. I think it took me about 3 years. And I have to admit, when I started writing it, I thought, this is preposterous, about me writing a book. I'd never set out to write a book, and I didn't tell anybody. I hadn't gone to a publisher to say I want to tell this story, because I wasn't quite sure I had it in me. I had spent the 3 years. It was only, I remember telling my wife about, I had finished the first draft to say, actually I've written a book and I've sent it into a publisher. I hadn't got word back that it was going to be published or anything. I remember her looking at me going, what? And then a few months later, I was very lucky that the publisher of Whittled Away came back and said, yeah, we want to do this. So
that shocks me so much. I presume that you had an interest in English literature and then got into the ecology, because you write in real prose. Like, it's really, again, I'd actually like you to read the first page at the end of it, because that portrait of that small area in Connemara is that kind of stuff that people need to connect to and kind of want to go out and see. Wow, there's a little place that I can go see a Celtic rainforest and a kelp forest all in the same day. And again, our wildlife is so depleted and, as you say, whittled away, but there is amazing stuff that we can still connect to foster that love of it. It's so interesting to hear 10 years ago as you were writing it. So thank you for that, Pádraic. In terms of the accounts of the old accounts, first eyewitness accounts of wildlife, why is it that we don't remember how bountiful our wildlife was generations past?
I think the story of ecological degradation or loss of nature, or whatever way you want to put it in Ireland, goes back a very long way. I mean, people will be maybe familiar with the story of our forests. People will know that Ireland was once a forested country and had wolves in it. People tend to blame the English for losing our forests, but actually most of our forest was gone by the time even the English colonised Ireland in the 16th century. So I think because the story stretches back so far, you do have this phenomenon called shifting baseline, that you kind of generation after generation forgets what was there before. And as people get older, the stories of abundance, the memories of abundance, the smells, the sounds are lost, and people think this is normal. So this is what allows tourist agencies to sell the west of Ireland as wild and unspoiled and, nature in its purest form. These are phrases I still see on websites around some of Irish landscapes, where in fact they have suffered waves of degradation over the centuries that have kind of taken it from one step down to another. So that is why it's very hard to maybe get people to imagine what Ireland would have been like. Even from a scientific point of view, we have no clear picture of what an intact forest looks like. What were the trees that grew in it? What were the animals that lived in it? We have no idea whatsoever what a pristine sea looks like around Ireland, because everywhere has been fished and trawled and affected in some way. So even from a scientific point of view, we don't have a clear picture of what that looks like. But we do know, we have enough accounts to know that it was hyper abundant in terms of fish and birds and animals, and hyper diverse as well. So I think there was a story in that. And actually, I think people can connect with it at some level. People will, of our generation, so I'm in my early 50s, people of my generation will remember childhood holidays where the windscreen was destroyed after driving from Dublin to Wexford in 2 hours, or they'll covered in insects. They'll remember how leaving a window open at night meant your bedroom was going to be full of moths and all kinds of things would be scraping at your window trying to get in. Fishermen will tell you how, easy it was to catch a salmon back in the 70s. So there are people who remember the latest wave of crash in our biodiversity. And so I think that message is getting through is the good news.
So actually, before we dig into Shaping New Mountains, on reflection of Whittled Away 10 years on, what are the biggest positive surprises that you didn't expect while writing it? And then what are the biggest frustrations that are still going on that you're surprised?
So there's no doubt about it that things have changed and things are changing. There is a shift happening, and this is enormously positive. The climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, I don't think we need to convince people anymore that we have these things going on. So I don't get the blank expressions anymore when I talk about how nature in Ireland has gone down the toilet. So that's it may not sound like a good thing. That is progress. We have to acknowledge the damage before we can talk about the solutions. And a lot of people are really keen to get involved in those solutions, whether that's, Nomo, May, or pollinators and stuff like that. We've also seen some, concrete successes. We have, even since I wrote Whittled Away, and this is not attribution, by the way, I'm not, this is not cause and effect. But I mean, in the last 10 years, we have seen the return of cranes, the return of marsh harriers, there was a sturgeon found in the waters around the southwest of Ireland only last week. Osprey, the white-tailed eagle population has
corncrake population.
The corncrake. There's stuff being done about curlews. There's a lot of bog restoration going on around the country. So there is a mobilization and there are good things happening. However, the reason we have a biodiversity crisis is because primarily of the food system that we operate. So our food system affects every square meter of land in this country and affects every square nautical mile of sea around our coast. And this is related to policy in Dublin, and like Irish policy that we set here, and policy in Brussels, and also kind of global patterns of economic consumption and development. And that is at the heart of our biodiversity crisis, whether it's the field behind your house or the Amazon rainforest. And unless we tackle that system, we're not going to get the recovery that we need. And that system has proven to be extremely stubborn. So while we have had a pollinator plan for 10 years now, and people are aware that bees are in trouble and people have been planting pollinator-friendly flowers, this unfortunately has not had an impact on pollinator populations because the system remains the same. The fields where the food is being produced remain biodiversity deserts, and until we tackle that systemic issue, we're not going to see the rebound that urgently needs to happen, and that's related to our climate crisis as well.
Where is it? That one?
Yeah, actually, Pádraic.
Is that kind of?
Well, this.
That's the system.
Yeah. Pádraic, would you be able to walk us through what you take from that image?
Yeah, so this goes back to our shifting baselines. So in years gone by, let's say that image on your left there, people lived in this hyper abundant and hyper diverse landscape. But it can also be said, people who remember this image will remember, God, life was hard back then, I mean, we weren't guaranteed that we'd have food in the winter. There was a lot of hard labor went into working the land. So a lot of people will look at that and say, we don't want to go back to that. Like ecologists will look, say, we want to go back to that. The people who actually lived in this landscape go, maybe not. And then when we moved to the right, this was seen as progress. This was seen as great. We can use chemicals. We can use big machinery to produce the food. We don't have to be worried about the hard labor anymore. I just need to nip down to the supermarket to fill my trolley with whatever I want. And it's all quite cheap. So this was all positive stuff. But As you see, going from left to right, slowly the landscape is becoming devoid of nature, a greater dependency on chemicals, greater dependency on automation and big machinery. Now, what I'd like to see is the slide to the right of that, to see if people don't want to go back this way, and we're inextricably moving in the other direction, what does the future look like?
Sterile.
Will it be a panel that shows wilting crops and no nature, or will it show a landscape where we develop a system where we can produce food that accommodates nature? That is the big challenge that we have today.
So, Pádraic, that's going to be the next question then. So, in an idealistic world, as you say, ecologists and purists would love this, to return all the land to wilderness. But realistically, we need to feed ourselves, we need food, all this kind of stuff. Is it possible to balance these two things?
Yes, is the very short answer. This has been worked out, not by me, I'd have to say. You know, a lot of scientists have been working on this challenge. So it is a system insofar that it's very much interconnected. If I give land to nature, that is less land for, let's say, farm animals or crops. And if we are going to be continuing the lifestyle we have today, that production is going to shift somewhere else. So there was a study there last year that said, it was based in the UK, you know, that rewilding is going to destroy habitats in other countries. It's going to lead to more destruction of the Amazon. But that assumes that our consumption is going to remain the same. So we do have to change our consumption. 3/4 of the farmland in this world is devoted to farm animals. All of the farmland in Ireland practically is devoted to farm animals. Even when you see fields of crops in Ireland, those crops are going to feed farm animals. The tops of our hills, right down to the bottom of our rivers and our coast, it's all to do with livestock agriculture. So we need to shift how we eat. We need to drastically reduce the amount of meat that we eat. And in such a system, there's more space for nature. In Ireland in particular, we need to start diversifying the food we produce. We need to be producing food for people. Those farmers who are growing fruit and vegetables in Ireland, I think there's like 20 of them left in Ireland. It's completely dying out because that system has driven them out. So we need to rebalance it. This can be done, but in order to do that, you are now facing very powerful and well-resourced economic powers, lobbyists and so on, who are profiting from the current system and don't want it to change. And we have seen, let's say in the row over the nature restoration law in the last couple of years, they are absolutely willing to use all and any means to prevent change in the system. So that's really where the fight is at.
What got you started on writing Shaping New Mountains?
So I was very happy with how Whittled Away was received because it is not a happy story. And we'd been told for years that people won't engage if it's a sad story. So I thought people did engage and accepted the heaviness of Whittled Away. Now, in Whittled Away, it's not like I said, we're all doomed, guys. We just need to start digging the bunker. I did outlay the solutions that are at hand, but the emphasis wasn't on the solutions. The emphasis was on what we had lost. So I thought that a nice follow-up would be focusing on the people and the initiatives that have been underway in Ireland to address it. So I went around, I spoke to politicians, I spoke to religious institutions, I spoke to farmers, fishermen, scientists, people out filling in drains and bogs and all that stuff. And I wanted to bring the human story in. So that was where Shaping New Mountains came about.
It's fantastic. And Pádraic, what I again very much suggest viewers go and listen to Shaping New Mountains. It is a wealth of information for, again, the positive stories of how we could transform our landscapes. But again, it needs to be tempered with the
modern Ireland,
with the facts of the modern Ireland. Yeah, so Pádraic, we'd just love to run you through the episode. So and just give us your view of what you wanted to get across, and then what has changed, because a good bit's changed in the last few years since you've released this.
So Shaping New Mountains is divided into different chapters about different landscapes, and one of them is to do with the bogs, particularly with the end of commercial peat mining in Ireland. There's a lot of space there that could be given back to nature. It actually is given back to nature. This would be what we would call passive rewilding. Nobody's doing anything in these areas, and so the trees are just growing by themselves, and wildlife is returning. And funnily, this picture here, there's a little crane if you zoom in at the bottom of this picture. And cranes have returned. Cranes are now breeding in Ireland, and it wasn't through any reintroduction program. It wasn't through any design. Nothing was done to the bog. Simply the machines were turned off, and now these magnificent birds are back breeding on our bogs. So that's hugely positive.
And not only that, but the fact that they weren't seen for the whole first year that they were here. I think that's such a magical story.
Yeah.
And then now that we know that they've fledged chicks, but there hasn't been one video shot of them yet. We tried to film them a couple of years ago, and again, we're actually trying this summer to go down because they do have chicks this summer. That's fantastic. And what about the other animals in terms of bittern and osprey?
Yeah, so down here we have a bittern. So we haven't had bitterns return yet. They may require an active reintroduction program, but I mean, I think the habitat is going to be there for them. The osprey up in the tree there, that was reintroduced as part of an ongoing reintroduction program. But while that was happening, a pair of ospreys set up their own nest. I think it was in County Fermanagh last year. I don't know how they got on this year. And I also snuck in a beaver down here in the corner, being a little bit sneaky on that, because beavers, there's no record we ever had beavers
Not yet.
In Ireland. I think we should have a debate around the absolute amazing power of beavers to restore our wetlands and our waterways. And I think there is a discussion in that. A lot of ecologists would immediately say, well, no, because it wasn't native, we can't go there. But I would be of the view that already half of the plants in Ireland that are growing are not native. You can go down to the garden centre today and buy all kinds of plants and shrubs, or you can go to a pet shop and buy anything you like from around the world. So I think the argument that, oh no, Ireland is somehow, a delicately, finely tuned ecosystem and we can't be putting things in, I think that day is come and gone. And I think we need to be able to rationally assess the benefits of a species like beaver for the enormous restoration power that it could bring.
I'd also like to just make a point on that it's very hard to know, and there's a lot of debate about what is native and what isn't native. For example, red squirrels, there's arguments that they were brought in by the Vikings for their pelts, but again, even with lynx, there must have been a sizable population of lynx, and we have one femur, isn't it? So very potentially there could still be time for a petrified pine beaver chewed log to be pulled out of a Midlands site, or potentially a beaver bone being found. But again, I think your point is so valid of, it's not like we have these pristine landscapes that are untouched that we can't mess with. There's been so much damage done. A keystone species like a beaver could actually provide a huge ecological benefit to our ecosystem. So that's a very interesting point.
It's a very good point, because the past in Ireland is fascinating, how the wildlife we have came to be here, but it's also very murky, and it's a story that's changing all the time. And I think while it is fascinating and it does help us get a picture of what the future might look like, nobody is suggesting that we are trying to rebuild the Ireland that existed 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, even if that were possible, which it isn't. I think the challenge we have is, how do we adapt to the environmental crisis we're in, and what are the best ways of doing that? Beavers are absolutely the most wonderful environmental engineers, and they could undo an awful lot of the damage we have done with concrete and diggers. They could do it at a fraction of the cost. I mean, if this was running on diesel, we would say this is proven technology at low cost, and why aren't we doing it? But because it's a wild animal, there's all kinds of hackles that go up that, oh no, we can't be doing that. But I think we really need to be moving on from that kind of framing.
Fantastic.
Where do we get these petrified logs?
So this one was, I think I called this chapter the Pearl Valley Farmland. It was about, how can we produce food and have clean water? So I think I was making a subversive point here about, people have told me, why are you talking about wolves and bringing wolves back to Ireland? This is totally way down the line. We can't, have healthy populations of salmon and bees, which are not killing sheep. So we need to focus on that first. But I was making a point here that the system we have of food production is not compatible with wolves any more than it's compatible with living with bees or salmon or freshwater pearl mussels, which are completely innocuous to people and livestock. So I was kind of thinking, well, look, if we could have a food system where rivers flowing through that landscape have healthy populations of freshwater pearl mussels, that is a sustainable food system.
And Pádraic, sorry, would you be able to just explain to the viewers why pearl mussels are such a good litmus test for the health of a river?
So pearl mussels are the opposite of charismatic megafauna. They don't have eyes, they don't have furry faces. They live on the bottom of rivers. They look like a mussel that you would eat with your chips, and that are in the sea. They're a little bit bigger. They have a pearl in them sometimes, but what makes them very difficult from a conservation point of view is that they really can only survive in the cleanest of waters. Now, if you go back 100 years, our rivers had billions of pearl mussels in them, which tells you how clean our waters were. They also live in association with salmon and trout. Part of their life cycle is they shoot their larvae into the water column. Those larvae then need to get attached to the gills of a trout or a salmon, and they live there on those gills for a number of years, and then they fall off at a moment of their choosing. And where they fall in the water will determine where they live for over 100 years. So it's quite a fascinating life cycle.
And sorry, Pádraic, does that mean that they go out to sea and then come back on the migration? If for example, if they attach to a salmon, do they go out to sea and come
No,
back?
they don't go out to sea. They will fall off the salmon or trout before that salmon will migrate into the sea. What's happening is the rivers now have been physically altered and the water quality has deteriorated, so that the pearl mussel population has completely crashed. Now, what's interesting is that we still have populations of old freshwater pearl mussels, geriatric mussels, but they're still breeding. And there are still salmon there and trout, and the larvae are still hatching onto them. But what's happening is when those larvae fall off the salmon or trout into the river is too polluted for them to grow. And so we only have old freshwater pearl mussels. We have no baby freshwater pearl mussels surviving. So this is slow motion extinction.
Even in Mayo, even in there.
I think there's one population left in the country that is able to produce young. No other population in the country has been able to, even though we've had special areas of conservation that are supposed to be allowing these populations to survive. It's just not happening because the water quality is so poor. And largely that's down to agriculture. And a decision was made 20 years ago, nearly now, I suppose, that freshwater pearl mussels were not going to stand in the way of dairy expansion. And it was as simple as that. And they can go extinct if they have to, but we're not going to let this get in our way. And as a result, the pearl mussels are dying out, as are many rivers, and estuaries are grossly polluted. A lot of our rivers now in summer, all you'll see are mats of green gunk floating down them. And so we've sacrificed an awful lot for the agricultural expansion that we've seen in recent decades.
And Pádraic, in terms of new changes to agriculture, in terms of settling ponds and high nature value farming that's coming in, there does seem that some of this, at least some of the runoff, should at least be forced to stop. And there should be, like, there's things like fencing off the river valleys to allow more trees to grow. To like there's systems that we can put in place to try and stop this. And yeah, so what do you see being the potential hopefuls of that technology over the next kind of 6 years? So
the biggest driver of pollution within farming is the number of farm animals. So when you think, so we have two big drivers of pollution. We have human sewage and we have animal sewage. Now, human sewage is treated. Like, we have treatment plants for towns and cities. Not all of them are working very well. There's a small and falling number of places in the country where there's raw sewage from humans going into the environment, which is illegal and outrageous and shouldn't be happening, but it is being addressed through technology. Animal sewage, on the other hand, just falls on the land. It's not treated. So it is a source of raw sewage. And if you have 6 million cattle in Ireland, if you have, I think it's 3 million sheep, you have another 3 or 4 million pigs, you might have 100 million chickens, all that feces and urine has to go somewhere, and it's not being exported, it's being put on the land. So we have a fundamental problem with the number of farm animals. Now, you can have buffer zones, you can have slurry storage, you can have rules around not spreading slurry in the lash and rain, and all those things are good things. They will improve matters. But the heart of the matter is that we have too many farm animals. And of course, this is related to the near zero level of space for nature that we have in Ireland. And it also spills over into places like South America because we're importing feed for all these farm animals. So unless we can tackle the number of farm animals, we're not going to tackle the state of our rivers. Now, this has been repeated ad nauseum to the state, but because the economic model is based on volume, any reduction in farm animal population is fiercely reduced by farm organizations and whoever the Minister for Agriculture happens to be on any given day. And that's where our problem lies. We are not going to address our water quality problems until we have fewer farm animals.
How are the farming organisations now dealing with the nature referendum laws, nature restoration laws that have come in? Are the farming organisations changing their tune at all? Are they embracing any of these changes?
So I think the farm organisations are going through the 5 stages of grief slowly and reluctantly. I think they're still at denial. They are also at the pleading stage because they've been in denial for a very long time. There's a thing called the nitrates derogation, which has allowed farmers to spread more slurry on their land than most European countries. And that's on the way out because of the levels of pollution in our water. They're also being squeezed by legally binding emissions reductions targets for climate change. They are now in a difficult space, I think. I think what's very unfortunate is that we have not seen any counter voice coming from the farming community. I think we've got about 250,000 farmers in Ireland. It's a very important economic sector. It's also very important culturally for a lot of communities. But we haven't seen the voice come from the farming sector to say that we need to take climate change and biodiversity loss really seriously. We have legally binding targets and we want to work towards how we can maintain a thriving agricultural sector while meeting all of those targets. That conversation is not happening. Instead, we get denialist tropes coming from both politicians and farming leaders about how, farmers are doing everything and, things are changing. And the fact is that the change that is needed is just not happening and we're not seeing the political leadership. And that's disastrous for everybody. It's not just disastrous for farmers. It's disastrous for all of us who have to suffer the pollution and the extinction that comes with all of that, and we are also paying for it. I mean, I'm often told that this is the price we pay for cheap food. We do not have cheap food because we pay for our food 3 times. We pay for it in the supermarket or wherever we're buying it. We pay for it through our taxes because an awful lot of public money goes to farming and farmers, and we pay for it in the damage to our environment that we're front loading onto future generations. I mean, we're told about fines we're going to have to pay. This is the fines are the minor part. The serious part is that, we're handing a dead planet to our children, in large part because of the food system that we have that isn't being addressed. So we definitely do not have a cheap food system. But the tragedy is we're not having the political, cultural, community conversation about how to transition to something different.
I think that's such a valid point that you make, that again, the farming organizations are not exactly representative of the farmers. A lot of farmers have the right mentality and want to make change, but as you say, the loud voices, it's the lobbyists that are doing things.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit because the farming organizations do represent farmers. As any trade union, farmers pay their dues and so on. Farmers, there are many farmers who do not agree on the trajectory. But on the other hand, the farming organizations, there are other benefits to being a member of these organizations. And Lord knows we have enough of them. I mean, must be 4 anyway, recognized farm organizations out there. There is one I'll give a shout out to. There's a group called Dublin Biodiversity that are working on agroecological and social, change in farming. And they're, I'd be very supportive of them, but they're not of the size that gets them at the table with the other guys. So The farmers, they kind of do and they don't represent. I haven't seen the popular uprising within the farming organization, within individual farmers to say we need different representation, better representation. That's not happening.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And then also what you've said, I think that's a very nice point, is about the system making farmland marginal farmland, not the land being marginal. You know, and I think, because again, I think you do show a lot of empathy towards farmers, and a lot of people, as you say, culturally, and a lot of people's livelihoods depend on the land, and it's a hard balance, that, you know, of us in Dublin and us city people having, like, wanting to prescribe, no, you can't do that for a particular reason.
It is, but I'd also ask, you know, who makes farm policy? Who decides what the economic system should be? And it's not you and it's not me. And the reality is it's a very small number of people who go to the Department of Agriculture and who between them set this policy. This isn't a secret, by the way. They boasted that farm policy was industry made, that this was a policy by and for the industry, not for the rest of us, not for the common good of this country. And so it's not a democratic system that is formed. It's not like our planning system, for instance, which is much more democratic. If somebody wants to build a skyscraper next door to me, I can object. I can go to my local politicians. I can't object to, in the same way, to dairy expansion or that the farmer next door is doing something. This is a much more opaque system. It's much more tightly controlled. And I'd even go further, because the Department of Agriculture controls agriculture, obviously, also the marine, also forestry. So, you know, we're talking about the origins of our biodiversity crisis. It's all happening in one building on Kildare Street in Dublin. Also maybe in Brussels, of course, but, you know, a lot of these decisions are made in one building in Dublin by a small number of people who are acting basically as proxies for the industry lobbies of these organizations, whether it's the forestry industry, the fishing industry, or the big agricultural organizations. They're not acting in the public good.
Powerful stuff, Mark. Yeah. In terms of actually, we'll go through the next one. The seas. Yeah, so the seas are obviously a very depressing story. Jump into it.
So, I mean, the sea, I mean, when I was, got back into ecology and I was driving around Ireland going, you know, searching for a forest or an intact bog, I'd at least go to the sea and go, well, phew, at least we have this, you know, enormous wilderness that is untouched. And then I started actually reading things and learning about what has been going on in the sea. And the sea has been absolutely hollowed out. And I think there's no better way to convey that point than by the facts that fishermen in Ireland, particularly the one in small boats, which are still the majority of fishermen, don't catch fish anymore. I don't know what the word for someone who catches crustaceans is, a crustacean man. It doesn't have the same ring to fisherman, a crabber. Even the crabs are gone. I was in Galway recently talking to fishermen, and the only thing that is left now is lobsters. Maybe a little bit of prawns. I'd say 80-90% of the catch now is lobsters, because the crabs have been overfished. And there's now serious worry that if the lobsters go, that's it. It's completely game over for this group. And it's not even the small boats. By value, the most valuable species coming from our sea for Irish boats is not fish anymore. It's nephrops, prawns, also called scampi or Dublin Bay prawns. So we have completely upended the ecosystem of the ocean, which has been a human tragedy as well as an ecological one. And I think the double tragedy is that we can't see it. So I can go and I can show you what an industrially mined out bog looks like, or a clear-felled forest, or a dairy prairie looks like. Very few of us will ever get to see the bottom of the sea and to see the damage that has been done. And because of that, the fishing industry gets away with this destruction. Basically, we don't know what the fishing industry are doing at any given time. The boats are out there ploughing up and down, you know, using nets the size of Crow Park, and there's very little supervision as to what's happening on it. A couple of years ago, the European Commission told the Irish government that they didn't trust the Irish government to monitor the fishing industry. And this is against a background of chronic overfishing and illegality that was happening on, including allegations of human slavery, people trafficking, horrendous stuff that you'd never get away with on land, and yet it goes on at sea on a daily basis.
And Pádraic, the sea, it's quite hard to conceptualize because, as you say, no one's going to see the bottom of the sea, and it seems like such an insurmountable issue, this. But then could you tell the viewers about Norway and the fact that it is possible to manage the resource?
Yeah, so I mean, the flip side of everything I've just said is that the easiest and quickest a way of seeing a wildlife bounce back would be in the sea, because all you have to do is stop the fishing. Now, you don't have to stop it completely, and you don't have to stop it completely everywhere. And Norway proved what could be done. Well, Norway's not in the European Union, so that gives you a hint about, the policy background to this. But Norway saw a collapse in its cod population around the same time that Ireland did, and Britain and other countries in this part of the world. But the Norwegians could see that actually this was a bad thing, because cod are really valuable. They're much more valuable than the other species in the sea, and that big cod are more valuable than small cod. So they took control of the situation. The government said this isn't going to continue. It's going to mean some pain for everybody, but we're going to support you through that transition period. We're going to tie up the boats. We're going to give the sea a rest. We're going to allow the cod regrow. And when we go back in and fish, there's going to be much stricter limits on what we catch. And in return, not only did the cod recover, Norway has, a hugely profitable fishing sector. Now, Norway's not an angel, I want to add, it's not, but it did take decisive action in this case. People going to a supermarket today to buy cod will look at, a piece of fish that is probably the length of a standard keyboard for a computer. People don't realize that a cod is probably the length of your car. A fully grown, healthy, mature cod is an enormous animal. And big, particularly the females, because in the fish world, females get bigger than the males. And as females get older, they produce more spawn and more eggs and more young. So allowing the fish grow big and old is a very productive thing to do, even from a commercial point of view. And what we do in fishing in Ireland is eradicate the big ones. The nets are designed to allow the small ones out in the belief that, these are the next generation. But we're hammering the middle age and the older. In fact, the older fish just aren't even there anymore, drastically reducing that productivity. And for that reason, we don't have commercial fishing for cod anymore in Ireland. We don't have whiting. We don't have plaice. Now, these fish are still caught. They're still out there. But they're not commercially important anymore. What was the other one? Herring. Herring are not a big fish, but they shoal in huge numbers. They have collapsed in the south. They've collapsed in the Irish Sea most recently. They collapsed in the north. That's pretty much everywhere. There's nowhere left. They believe that they're recovering in the north. But these huge shoals of fish are gone. And what astounds me with the fishing industry and the mentality, and I don't want, it's the fishing industry and the politicians that support them. They're yin and yang. What astounds me is that unlike Norway, there's no moment of reflection to say, oh no, isn't that terrible? We need to stop what we're doing and try to get these fish back. They just go, oh, that's a bummer. We're going to move on to whatever's left to be caught. So we saw in 10, 15 years ago, there was a fish called a boarfish, which you will never see in the supermarket. And they developed techniques to catch boarfish. These are small fish. You see them in aquariums sometimes. They're quite pretty. And they opened up a market to China for these boarfish. Lo and behold, they were caught in huge abundance until they collapsed. And again, it was like, oh, whoops. What can we move on to next? And today we're debating about marine protected areas and just this lack of self-reflection among the industry and the representatives in the industry, always looking to blame something else instead of saying, okay, we need to work together to try and restore some of this abundance.
You've talked about Brussels policy. is Ireland very progressive with our environmental policy, or what's our relationship with Europe like in terms of policy?
So in terms of fishing in Ireland is controlled by the Common Fisheries Policy, which is set in Brussels. So you'll hear fishermen say that they got a very poor deal in the Common Fisheries Policy, and Ireland gets a very low share of the fish. And this is true. We did, and a lot of the effort of the fishing industry is to try and increase their slice of the pie. They want more of the fish that are being caught. And, there is an argument in that. Whether that can actually change, I don't think it can, because the other fishing countries would have to then sacrifice it, and there's no reason for them to do that. So you get a lot of populist talk from politicians about, I'm going to fight for you, I'm going to get you more quota. The politics of it basically is much different, that it's not going to happen, and it hasn't happened. But one way of getting more fish into the sea would be to allow ecological recovery. And we do control within, depending on there are different limits, but between 6 miles from our coast and 12 miles from our coast, the Irish government has much more control. We don't have super trawlers from Latvia coming into the seas within 6 nautical miles. So there's a lot we could do in that zone. Most of our fishermen are operating in small boats in that zone. So there's a lot we could be doing. But Ireland's track record, both in that zone and outside it, has been appalling, has been absolutely abysmal in terms of managing anything in it. Yesterday, we got an announcement from the government that they're going to prevent trawlers over 18 metres coming within 6 nautical miles of the coast. This has been a campaign that has been going on for over a decade between not only environmentalists, but small boat fishermen. And, eventually we're seeing some action on it. But we saw this year also, the whales off the south coast are gone because, according to the local boatmen, there's nothing left for them to eat. So we have to ask, is it now too late? We have to hope it isn't. But, the government is so slow to do any of these things that we have to look at the possibility that, maybe we've damaged the sea so much that recovery can't happen. Personally, I really hope it isn't the case. But the rate at which we do these things, it's too half-assed and it's way too slow to see the change that should be happening.
Good stuff. The last 2 episodes have been kind of the most 2 depressing episodes in terms of like the farmland and the seas. They're the 2 areas, and as you've said, like farmland makes up the vast majority of this country, and it is the vast majority of the ecological damage. So, and also, as you say, I really hope that voice does come through the farming community of that young woman or man farmer who wants to get into farming and sees that there is a way to do this profitably and try and lead the way in a way of making money off the land and making a living out of the land, but while doing it in an ecologically responsible way. Pádraic, that's fantastic. And PJ, 1 more or 2 more.
There's the city, natural capital.
So I'm from Dublin, and I was lucky to grow up near the Phoenix Park. Also, during lockdown, I had the Royal Canal within my, whatever it was, 2 kilometre radius. So I was very lucky. But a lot of people are not so lucky. And a lot of people live in cities. And there are parts of Dublin where maybe your only green space looks something like the African savanna without the wildlife. We know there is a thing called, is it called green apartheid? Whereby there's a direct relationship between, this has been demonstrated, there's a direct relationship between the value of homes and the wealth in a given area and the number of trees on the street. So if you go down to Aylesbury Road in Dublin 4, I mean, it's practically forested. Beautiful, mature trees, boughs of, whatever they are, planes or whatever types of trees, bending into gardens, and it's wonderfully shady. And then you can go to other parts of the city that are just concrete everywhere. So this is very bad for people's mental and physical health. You need places to be. We all need places to be. And I do use that word advisedly. It is essential. We need it like we need vitamins and protein in our diet. We need places where we can be in contact with nature. And this has also been demonstrated that the poorer quality nature that people have access to, the poorer levels of mental health that are reported. So we should be really trying to make our cities green and wildlife friendly. They're not going to be ancient forests or natural ecosystems. But one city I looked at, which has transformed itself in my lifetime, is Singapore. And Singapore is obviously in the tropics, it's bang on the equator, but they recognize the problems of climate change and climate vulnerability and typhoons and extreme weather and all these things that were affecting them. And they set about revegetating their city, restoring the tiny little bits of forest that they had, cleaning their waterways, removing concrete to create ponds and wetlands. This is the concept of the sponge city, so that when you get these, really heavy rainfall, the city is able to soak up the water so that the effect is less destructive. And it's also hugely popular and hugely beneficial for the local people. The local otter population in Singapore is now like movie stars. People have developed a real connection with the local wildlife. Nearer to home, Paris has been undergoing a transformation in the last 10 years. Revegetating is the French word for it, bringing trees back, digging up car parks and turning them into mini forests, cleaning the water in the River Seine. They opened the swimming there a couple of weeks ago. This requires investment. You can come up against a lot of opposition. But you could contrast that with Dublin. Dublin is naturally, I think, really predisposed to having a lot of nature. We're by the sea. We have a biosphere in Dublin Bay. We have Bull Island. We're very close to the hills in Dublin. But if I go up the Dublin Mountains, what am I going to see? I'm going to see industrial plantations of conifers that are clear felled. I might be unlucky and go up one day and the forest will just be gone, and it'll look like something from a post-apocalyptic film. And I would contrast that to a city like Oslo, for instance, where you can get a bus up to the forest and walk on off-road trails in an actual forest.
With a wolf pack.
Native trees. Yeah, no, the Norwegians are not great on their wolf.
They're not, but there is a pack now.
I heard that, yeah.
But they're not good. You're dead right. They're not good with their...
But it's a way better than Ireland. And in Norway, which I'm familiar with because my wife is from that country and I visit a lot, having access to nature is considered, equivalent to having clean water coming out of your tap. If anybody threatens their local park or the forest around their living area, there'd be uproar. So I don't think that attitude is needed here, is seen here in Dublin. You go down to Bull Island, and despite the fact that it's a national nature reserve, a special area of conservation, a special protection area, a UNESCO biosphere reserve, you can basically do whatever you want. You can play golf, you can go out and rake the clams off the mud flats, you can let your dog off to chase the birds, you can do kite surfing anywhere you want. It's a mess. And it shouldn't be like that. Now people should be able to enjoy these places, but there has to be rules, to put in place to give these designations some kind of meaning. So I think Dublin would lend itself really well. I do see signs of it happening. I think they did a lovely job there on Francis Street in Dublin was redesigned recently. Lots more trees, totally changes the character, more outdoor seating, less traffic. I think there's huge appetite for it, but we saw in Dublin the kind of opposition you get, even if you want to stop somebody turning right at a given junction. There was uproar by people who own luxury shops and car parks that this was going to turn Dublin into, some kind of a zombie apocalypse city. Nobody would want to go into the city ever again. And lo and behold, when it happens, people love it and people are using the city centre more. But it's just incredible that there's so much opposition to what should be basic measures to make the city more inhabitable, not even necessarily for wildlife, but for people. We're talking about making pleasant living spaces where, you could maybe walk with your child without gripping their arm, that you could walk with your children, that an old person could just hang out and not have car fumes in their face. So I think this could be an amazing project for the city and applicable to any city or town in Ireland.
Capel Street, I think, has made strides in that. Has it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's still a little blank, and then there's emergency vehicles going down.
Yeah.
Kind of every hour, it seems.
Yeah.
And Athlone's going to, or Ballymore is trying to turn Athlone into the first green city. Have you heard that before? And double the population before 2030.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and again, that's a clear example of business leadership trying to do something. That Ballymore are very into biodiversity things generally.
Yeah, there seems to be a spectrum of approaches. I mean, if I could call out Galway, the authorities in Galway seem to be absolutely allergic to anything that might make life easier for cyclists or pedestrians. It's total car brain. And you go down to Salt Hill, which is a beautiful promenade, really popular, but it's basically a car park. And you go to any other European city and you'd have this wide, public space where people could sit. You could have performances on summer evenings, or but there seems to be just I think they call it car brain. This attitude that if you can't get in your car and drive to it, it's not worth going to, and nobody's going to make it there anyway.
Car-centric infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a disease.
Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So this was the wild Atlantic rainforest, and it was inspired a bit by Owen Dalton down in the Beara Peninsula, who bought a farm and has written about it in his book, The Irish Atlantic Rainforest, and how we could get our forests back. You'll notice with all these pictures, actually, guys, that I have people in them. So I'm keen to make sure that people are in these areas and being a part of it. But I mean, the state of our wild native forest in Ireland is abysmal. It's maybe 1 or 2%. In fact, I don't even have an accurate figure to give you, because we've never even gone to the trouble of finding out how much native forest we have. I was in a beautiful area of old oak rainforest in Kerry last week that has absolutely no protection whatsoever. So even though we have these last remnants of, the what you might call the real biodiversity of Ireland, they're not cherished, they're not protected. A lot of them are overrun by invasive species and overgrazing by deer and things like that. But getting these forests back to something of a healthy state, even like you could double and triple, quadruple the amount of native forest we have, you'd still only be at like 5%. So, it wouldn't be a big undertaking, I think, in spatial terms. Certainly wouldn't involve reducing food production in any way. But what we have discovered is really it's not really a discovery, but we're beginning to realize is that the trees are perfectly capable of planting themselves if you give them the right conditions. We have become accustomed to believing that if you want a forest, you need to go out and plant a load of trees. And you need to decide where they go, and you're probably going to put them in a tube. And then you come back a year later and half of them are dead. And then you come back 10 years later and the tubes are still there, and, it's all a bit of a mess. But if you create the right conditions, the forest will regrow. And we've seen this in other countries. We've seen it actually in most European countries. We're in a similar situation to Ireland in the 1800s. Virtually zero, very low levels of native forest left. But due to migration, particularly people who lived in mountainous areas moved out of the cities. Of course, I mean, there was world wars and all kinds of mass emigrations and negative things associated with this. But if you go to Scandinavia, France, Spain, Italy, huge areas of forests. We're talking 30-40% national coverage of forest. A lot of it natural regeneration. A lot of it now, like in Italy, they have bears and wolves, and Spain, and similarly in these countries. But the point being that we in Ireland at the moment, we have this crisis in forestry. There's a lot of money was put into redeveloping our forestry program and trying to get landowners to plant forests. I was on that. I was on the kind of the working group to redevelop this, and I tried to make the point until I was blue in the face that if we really want a quick expansion of forest in Ireland, the best way of doing it is through natural regeneration, is through reducing grazing pressure, identifying where there's existing forests and allowing them to spread. The greatest forester in this country is not a man or a woman, but a jay. The jay will plant like hundreds, thousands of acorns over their lifetime, and the forest will regrow if we get the conditions right. And other countries have done it. Costa Rica, Nepal have done it, as well as those countries. They did it deliberately, not through, social disaster like in European countries. So it can be done methodically and in a planned way. And I tried to get this point across, but I failed. And so the attitude, even though they put a lot of money into this program, people are not taking it up. They're not interested in it. They're not interested in Sitka spruce plantations, which are biodiversity dead zones and which are probably going to be dead in 30 years anyway because of beetles and drought and other pressures. So we're still not at the stage where we see forests as an ecological proposition. It's still seen as a commercial proposition. And the attitude that, Ireland, the only tree that grows well in Ireland is Sitka spruce, and all of our infrastructure has been designed around that, the sawmills, the supply chains. Therefore, whatever we do has to be around Sitka spruce. And I saw a comment from somebody in the forest industry that people who believe that native trees can grow to any extent in Ireland are not living in the real world. Because this isn't a commercial and this is the if you're running a forestry business, this is your real world. And they're saying, I can't work with oak trees that are going to take 100 years to grow. This isn't, so for them, this isn't the real world. Okay, I live in a different real world, obviously, to a lot of these other people. So, but I think the challenge really is getting away from that cultural mindset that has locked us into this attitude that forestry is only really useful if it's mass-produced timber for sawmills. We have to look at forestry as an ecological challenge, something that nature could mostly do itself, needs a little bit of help. I'm not saying we shouldn't plant trees anywhere. We obviously have to control the grazing, but this could be like a 30-year project. We could get to 30%, 40% of our land in forest. Most of that will be native forest. It's not going to be ancient oak forest, but it can be ecologically coherent native woodland that will be resilient to climate change, that will allow for dynamics and evolution, and would allow space for reintroduction of lynx and other animals, so that we bring a sense of ecological integrity back to the country. It's perfectly doable, but not with this commercial mindset that we seem to be saddled with.
Pádraic, can you tell us about the last chapter, Bear Country?
So I'm going out a bit on a limb here. I was trying to imagine, what would be like the end point of ambition. What would be the most ambitious thing we could imagine in Ireland? And I think it's bears. I think, imagining a landscape in Ireland where you have bears roaming, which they did. There's huge abundance of evidence about the existence of bears in Ireland, and so I thought, well, where would that happen? Because bears, unlike wolves would basically live anywhere, and bears are a little bit fussier. They don't like so much human intrusion. They do need a lot of space with low levels of human activity. And so I thought, the place for this would be kind of that bit between Connemara and North Mayo, because it is a very big space with low population density. And so I thought I think it's, we talk about anything in Ireland, and I'm being told I'm being unrealistic, and I'm being ridiculously ambitious. That could never happen. But we do have to imagine. We do have to paint a picture for ourselves about stuff that seems unimaginable. Because to me, a world that's going to be 3 degrees warmer by the end of this century, and that has barely anything living in it, is also unimaginable. We do have to imagine that dark side. So to me, being really ambitious about what we could do through rewilding is also imaginable. We should go there. And it's also great fun, to imagine what Ireland would look like. And a lot of people will also accuse me of wanting, to have no people in these areas. So, what would it look like to have people and wildlife living in these places? And this is very much embedded in the mindset of a lot of people, particularly in the west of Ireland. The National Parks and Wildlife Service, the acronym was said of them that it stood for No People West of the Shannon. And you still hear that anybody promoting nature restoration, the flip side of that is you don't want people. So, I mean, you kind of think so obviously people feel that you can't live in a landscape that has wildlife in it and is healthy so this attitude has developed. So I have a picture there of a woman farmer who has belted Galloways and is also, having beehives and stuff like that. Bees are very lucrative, actually. I mean, they don't require a lot of maintenance, and you can buy a jar of honey these days for 20-30 quid if you're so minded. So as a part of a not we're not talking about like monocultures of beehives here. We're talking about small holdings, small people doing a number of things. Maybe this woman has the house let out for Airbnb, and but finding a way to live in a vibrant rural setting that is never going to have like dense human population, but can have schools that have children in them and that have activities. Because if you go to Mayo today, despite the fact that people think that having nature will result in people leaving the place, this place is suffering a drain of people and has done for 50, 60 years, so that you're driving around, you're seeing kind of sad, desperate ads on the side of the road to please enroll your children in the school, which is kind of the opposite of the problem we have in Dublin. So how do you get people back into the landscape along with the bears? And people will think this is outrageous, but it's happening in many countries. It's happening in Italy, where it's happening in Spain, which are suffering like drastic levels of depopulation. And this is for complex reasons, because the traditional uses of the land through farming, forestry, hunting, those kinds of activities are not of interest to young people. Young people don't see a future for themselves laboring the way their grandparents did for something that produces very little economic return. They don't see a future for their children. How do we flip that around? And I think that is happening in some parts of Europe, where through, let's say, better digital communication, through better housing, there is something very appealing for young people to go, I don't want to live in a city. I want to live somewhere I can be in contact with nature. This is the kind of lifestyle that I would like. Again, it's not about going back to the past. I think in France, there is also a backlash against people, say, from Paris moving into these rural areas. So the people say, yeah, we want the population to increase, but not that way. We don't want immigrants. We don't want
city slickers.
We want the people who were here before,
Yeah.
which is kind of this nostalgia, which is, linked to the far right and stuff like that, imagining this amazing country that existed 30, 40 years ago after there was, Holocaust on the continent that never existed. We see it in Ireland as well, thinking that the 50s was some kind of a golden age, whereby, women were kept in basements basically, and,
Not allowed in any businesses.
awful things happened in this country. And anyway, but it's trying to get away from that image that, that there is a kind of a rural ideal that we should be striving for, but that there is a future for people in rural Ireland, but it's not going to be through beef monocultures or having hundreds of sheep on the side of the hill. It is through diversification of the economy, through subsidies. Yes, I don't think these places would survive without subsidies, but if we can redirect those subsidies towards smaller enterprises, towards nature-friendly activities, small-scale farming, like we don't have to eliminate meat eating or livestock farming to get to this, to achieve our goals. And that's why I kind of used the belted Galloways. They're a popular breed. I know, Theo, you were mentioning the
Irish heritage breeds. There's a
Irish
few of them,
heritage
but
breeds,
yeah,
there's
Irish Molids
Kerrys
and
there's,
Kerry Blacks and
Drimmen cattle.
Drimmen they're doing great now.
Yeah.
They're on islands in the Shannon now.
Yeah. And these are coming back in. They're very low maintenance. They're smaller.
And so, as you said about farming culture, so entwined in our nation's culture, our manuscripts are written on the vellum of a lot of these animals, and we've lost our white part cattle, which I'm not sure if you know any of the history of that, but they were one of the last herds was taken out of Ireland. They now live wild in England, and that is where sirloin comes from. It was the Celtic white part cattle, and again, there's no push to bring those back. But again, that's a slightly different. That's more farming and heritage breeds, but it does tie into all this farming.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about really is a place where people have options, different economic streams coming from land use, and it could be forestry, it could be food production or whatever, or it could be just nature. It could be people getting paid to maintain a bog or being paid to promote links or whatever it is. And there are models. This is not pie in the sky. This has been done. But what we have seen, and we really saw it during the debate on the nature restoration law, the farming organizations were fighting tooth and nail to prevent farmers having options. We were making the point that, if a farmer wants to rewild their land, make that an option for them. Give them the same subsidies that they're getting for the sheep, but let them and help them do it. Put the supports in place so that the money could go there. And if a farmer says, okay, I really want to farm, I know it mightn't be the best thing for nature, but we could do it in a nature-friendly way, that's fine. But the supports, again, are going towards the nature-friendly farming. And those models are there as well. But what we saw, and what we continue to see, is farming organizations saying, no, the money has to go into the sheep. And they have fought to get higher payments per head of animal. This is called headage payments. We've done this before. It was completely catastrophic because the hills were then overloaded with sheep, and basically the peat ended up washing into rivers, and the whole ecosystem in this part of the country, Galway, Mayo, was destroyed. And yet we're still not able to have a conversation about what can we do that isn't sheep, because the leader, these are leaders in their communities, are saying no. The only option for us is to get more public money into increase, and it makes no economic sense whatsoever. You have an aging population, you have pumping public money into a dying economic model that is ecologically ruinous and contrary to social and economic gains. I don't particularly understand how it perpetuates itself. I do and I don't. It does because the farm organizations demand it. Our Minister for Agriculture gives them what they want. But ultimately, I can't understand why there aren't other voices, particularly at the political level, saying, we got to move on, and we got to put these options in place so that farmers have choices, and that young people can come and say, okay, I don't want to be running sheep up and down a mountain, but I would like to do a bit of farming, and I would like to do a bit of tourism, and I would like to do something else and have something that's just for nature. But those supports are not there for those young people that might want to do that.
On that note, I think of all the people who summarize the man in the arena, the Roosevelt line, I think that's you, Pádraic. I think we definitely want to have you on much more, talking through many things, and it's an absolute honor to meet you, and thank you very, very much for spending the time with us today. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching the show. That's it.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.